To everyone who's here for the first time, to the first Coffee with EMBL, welcome. And to all of our regular participants who are coming back, welcome back. This is the 11th Coffee with EMBL session that we've carried out. And again, we're carrying on with what's turned out to be quite a remarkable series of events. Very excited with the program we have today. Once again, we are blown away by the number of people participating. We've already had over 175 people registered, both EMBL staff from all of the member laboratories around Europe, and also well over 100 EMBL alumni from all around the world. So we have fantastic global coverage. And as usual, we encourage everyone to participate in the discussion. So I encourage you to open up the chat box and follow the chat and contribute to it. If there's something raised during the discussion that you'd like to contribute to, put your hand up or make a comment in the chat. And as we're going along, we will do our best to give everyone an opportunity to contribute and have an interactive debate and discussion led by our guests. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce briefly the guests and discussants that we have today, starting with Dame Janet Thornton. So if you could just say a few words, Janet, about yourself. I think everyone knows who you are, but please.
Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here. I'm Janet Thornton. I'm currently group leader at European Bioinformatics Institute in Hinxton, Cambridge. I joined EMBL in 2001 as director of the EBI when EBI was still quite small. We were about 150, and now we're over 800 people. So during that time, the Institute has grown enormously. And as you're all totally aware, the importance of computational biology and bioinformatics and data has become one of the major changes, I think, that's happened in the life sciences over the last 10 years.
Thank you very much, Janet. And I'd also like to introduce Marion Boland, who's the Head of Research Policy at Science Foundation Ireland.
Thanks, Angus. Delighted to be here, and thank you for the invitation. As Angus said, I'm in Science Foundation Ireland. I'm the Head of Research Policy there. So for any of you who don't know what Science Foundation Ireland is, we're the main or the largest funder of STEM research in Ireland. But I suppose of more relevance, I was previously the national delegate representing Ireland on the EMBL Council for, I think, about 4 or 5 years, up to about 2017. So I'm delighted to be back here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to introduce Isabel Palacios.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the invitation, by the way, to the alumni office and Angus and whoever else suggested it. I was at EMBL from 93 to 97. I was a PhD student in the gene expression department in those days with Ian Mattaj. And today I'm a lecturer now in Queen Mary University of London in the UK. But I also founded a charity with 2 other friends of mine, Marta and Lola, who may be also with us, called Drugs Africa. And I think the discussion today is going to be concentrated on what we do and what you guys could be involved with if you want. Thank you.
Fabulous. We're looking forward to that. And also, I'd like to introduce Mariana Alves, who is a current pre-doc at EMBL. Mariana, do you want to say hello?
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm from Portugal, and I'm doing my PhD in the Crocker Group in Heidelberg. And since I joined the EMBL, that I've been involved with Drugs Africa, with Isabel, and doing some initiatives for EMBL to be more involved in equality and inclusion and the Global South. So I hope we can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely great. And I'd also like to say hello to lots of familiar faces. Some faces I've seen now at 10 or 11 of these meetings, and I sort of feel we've got to know each other. Other people I know have definitely got to know from all around the world, including for me as far away as 2 or 3 miles across the river in Dundee, where I see my colleague Jeff Barton, who I haven't physically, hi Jeff, I haven't physically been able to meet up with due to the restrictions for months, and many very familiar faces. So very much welcome to everyone coming back. For those of you who were present last month, we had a great discussion about the value and importance of basic science, a topic that Maria Lepton had invited us to make as a topic for discussion. And we just wanted to share with you a short video reel of a couple of extracts and sound bites from that exciting discussion.
Hey, do we have to explain it? Because it's self-evident to us. We know how we can switch. We know what a good scientific training and good critical scientific thinking does. We know that. We know that. But how can the man in the street or the politician in parliament know that? They can't. It's our duty to keep telling them and to keep explaining patiently.
But there are also many problems that we as scientists have to take care of in our own circles. But we cannot be arrogant and think, I think there's no problem to understand that most people don't understand why basic science is important, because we are not so good at really communicating what we are doing in such a way that the people understand. And if you look at the science teaching in schools, the programs are pretty rotten. They could be much, much better. And all that is important to change this world. And especially when we think about what's coming. COVID was nothing compared to the global crisis, the climate, all that. We have to innovate. We are damned to innovation.
Thank you. So that was just a little reminder of some of the discussion, just a small snapshot. And it's also a preview of some of the things we're hoping to do in future, making some more of these bite-sized clips from Coffees with EMBL available online for you to refer back to. But these were just a brief reminder about this discussion that we had about the importance of basic science and this almost surprising, seemingly surprising idea that we have to keep re-explaining it. So, Janet, I would never be so rude as saying that you're a poacher turned gamekeeper. You have had the experience of sitting on both sides of the table as a supplicant, asking for funding, and always getting it in your case, of course. And on many occasions now, being on the other side of the table. You and I have both sat on the other side of the table, having to make difficult decisions about who to fund. There's never enough money. You want to fund more people. And then you rose to this incredibly important position in Europe of leading the ERC. So we'd love to hear some of your thoughts about those experiences. And could you share with us your thinking about, is it obvious to the man in the street why basic science is so important?
No, I don't think it is, despite the climate situation and despite the pandemic. I think people do not understand exactly how science is funded. They don't understand the way we peer review each other. And of course, they don't understand the basic science, partly because the education that most children receive is still, I don't think, sufficiently informative about many aspects of science. And it's difficult to keep up. If I think about when I was a child at school, of course, the genomic era hadn't even started by any means. And so I couldn't learn about it at school. And so it's only really in the last 20, 30 years, I started as a physicist and became a biologist, that I'd learned about these huge advances. So if we struggle with things, then of course the man in the street, but not just the man in the street, the politicians as well don't really understand. But returning then to the European Research Council, so I should say that I was the vice president, Angus, just to make certain people understand, I was a vice president with responsibility for life sciences. And this means the European Research Council is a very unusual funding body, actually, because the Scientific Council of the ERC determines all the policies, all the calls, the way the structure is run, etc., with, of course, the help of the agency. But it's the Scientific Council, of which I was a member, that runs this. And that council, one of our main missions was to run the funding so that it was the best as it possibly could be for the scientists involved. And that really was based on the concept of research that was defined by the researcher. So the researchers come up with the idea of what to do. It isn't just basic research. There is applied research in there, and there's no valuation between the basic and the applied. It's just how good the proposal is, whether it's innovative, whether it's frontier science, and whether it's timely, whether there is the opportunity now to really make good progress in that field. And I think the scientists know that. So we often call this bottom-up research, and this is a critical part of research, because if we as scientists don't know what's feasible, what's doable, and what is important, then nobody does. So rather than defining from the top what scientists do, this is a bottom-up process whereby the scientists say what they would like to do. And I think this is the most important aspect of the ERC, actually, the European Research Council. I mean, so because I can see Angus about to jump in, I just want to say that this is just one sort of funding, and others are also important. But frontier research, in my mind anyway, is the most important.
Yes, I think I suspect most people listening here in this audience would agree. Although if you don't agree, please put your comment in the chat, and I can see some already. I want to pass on to Janet. I guess I would just like to bring up, without disagreeing with you, Janet, just to bring up one comment that relates to a lot of things I've heard recently from politicians, at least in the UK, and I'm not sure in other countries, but hearing them say in response to the pandemic that their policy as politicians is being led by the scientists. And yet I know personally, and we have seen explicitly in this forum, different scientists have diametrically opposing opinions. And so when you say it's being driven by what the scientists think of it best, the danger one might see is that you end up with a clique of pals who say this is what scientists believe, when actually it's just what a subset scientists believe. Do you think that's an issue or not?
I think yes, it clearly is an issue. Science, good science, is evidence-based and presents the facts. Of course, the policies that you take are different from the facts. They should be based on the facts. And I think there is a hope by creating committees. In the UK, we have this SAGE committee that informs the government. But of course, the government ultimately chooses how to interpret the data that they are given and which policies to make. And there is quite a strong distinction between those two aspects. However, I do think there is sometimes the temptation to blame the scientists because the data aren't saying what people want to hear. So I think we have to be very clear to separate the data and the science and the knowledge from the policy decisions that are taken resulting from that data.
Yeah, I was just trying to unpack or sort of explore a little bit the idea that if we're too top-down in the way you do these things, you can have organizations that are not as open to very radical new disruptive new ideas because you have this sort of establishment view, and it's very easy to squash any sort of antithetical sort of dissenting voice.
I agree. And this does very clearly happen in science. When there is groupthink, everybody thinks the same, and then somebody comes in left field and finds a new way of looking at it and a new approach. And I think we have to always be open to those sorts of things. But at the same time, I do very strongly support peer review. It has problems, obviously, but I think it is critical that we do review and that as scientists we commit to reviewing other people's science with an open mind, not being biased by our own preconceptions of how things happen. But I think that the best we can do is to do peer review, actually.
How difficult was it in practice? I say this with a lot of sympathy because I had a little bit of experience in chairing, as you know, grant committees, and I never appreciated how difficult it was to give away money wisely until you're forced to try and do it yourself, and you realize it really isn't as easy as you think. All of us have prejudices in how we do this. How do you measure whether you were actually successful or not? Because, I mean, that's, as scientists, what we all strive to do is you have a hypothesis, but you test something, and then you want to look back and say, did I get that? Was my model correct or not? How do you measure that?
So I should say the European Research Council has this agency, here, with about 500 people, and they have the best way of gathering statistics I have ever seen in any research council. And so they rigorously look at the outcomes. So as an example, we can say, well, do women succeed as well as men? So are the number of people funded proportionate to the gender-wise, to the number of applications? And during the time when I was on council, there was a clear improvement in that, so that actually in my last meeting, the last call, the results were exactly equal for men and women in terms of the success rate. However, the number of women applying is still much lower than representative of the community. In terms of the success of peer review, in effect, how good are we at choosing the really good results? So the ERC do various things to try and assess this. One is to do what they call post hoc evaluation. So 5 years after the end of a grant round, they will look and ask, was this grant successful? Did it perform frontier research? Was there a breakthrough associated with it? So that's one way that they look at it. Of course, they also look at citation rates, which can be confusing, but they are data, they're facts, and should be taken into consideration. And that shows that there are very high citation rates for ERC grantees. They also get an expert in the field after 5 years to look and say, well, what were the advances in this field? And then say, did ERC contribute? Were there any grants funded in this area? So they do a lot of effort to try to address whether they can successfully identify the really good grants. They're also starting some new efforts to do that even more as rigorously as they can. But it's terribly difficult to do it, actually. And what you see is that it's, as we all know, when you sat on a grant committee, it's easy to identify the top 5%. It's easy to identify the grants which aren't going to get funded. But in the middle range, it's always difficult to rank proposals next to each other. And the standard is very high, very, very high at the ERC. And sadly, we rank our grants A if they're worthy of funding, and we always end up with only being able to fund about half of the A-rated grants, which is really disappointing. And I think it's something that we as a community have to impress on our politicians. I mean, the success rate in the LC is about 12 to 14%. It's very, very low. And it really makes much more sense to hopefully have more funding to allow this really good research to go forward.
So yeah, I mean, I would agree that it is usually easy to identify the absolute best ones from a model inside the box. I think it's really hard to identify outliers that are outside the box, but actually in historical terms, when you look backwards, will come out to have been the most innovative. I mean, the old comment that's been made many times is, would Einstein, as a young unknown patent office examiner in Switzerland, if he put an ERC grant in, would he have been funded? And almost certainly the answer is no, and yet he transformed physics.
I agree completely. That's just the way it is, really. But I should say that the panels, the way that you choose the people who sit to review these panels, is very important. And it's important that it isn't a clique, as you said before, Angus, that the panel changes frequently and that the members of the panel come from all over Europe, so that you get very different views coming round the table. And I think that helps to address this. But Einstein would never have got funded. None of us would have funded him, I think, is the answer.
If you think you would have funded Einstein, please feel free to comment. Yeah, there's some really interesting points being made that I'd like to come back to in just a moment about the concept of citizen science, citizen involvement. Yeah. But Marion, I think this would be a great time to hear your thoughts as someone with so much experience in running Science Foundation Ireland. I'm sure some of these points we've been discussing must resonate with you.
Absolutely.
And running a national funding agency, it's a somewhat different job than trying to provide funding to people from all over Europe. But how would you feel about this issue of assessing whether you funded the right grants and meet your mission?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it is something that has come up quite a lot in discussion and over the years around, did we fund the right group of grants in a certain year, and when is the appropriate time to assess that? Because obviously, the readout of research can come many years later, and is also defined by how, to use the old term, I suppose, how you define success. And I suppose one of the ways we've tried to, diversify how we evaluate applicants is by embracing the DORA principles, which I think everyone will be familiar with. And we believe
that might just briefly, sorry to cut across, maybe not because we have a very diverse audience from all over. If you could just briefly explain to us what that is, that would be great.
Yeah, so DORA is stands for the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, and it was basically conceived by a bunch of, I think, basic researchers who convened at a cell biology meeting in the States some years back, and it was essentially to move away from conventional metrics and take a more holistic or broader approach when evaluating research proposals and evaluating the outcome of research grants that had been funded. So the idea here is that they care less about the journal that you published in, or the fact that it is a high impact factor journal, or what your H index is, but that it looks more on the quality, I suppose, of or impact of the work that you've done, and asks you really, in your application, I suppose, or in your in the review or assessment of an application to look at different outputs, the broader outputs of research, which can include things like mentorship, education and public engagement, which can talk about, I suppose, more, sort of less, perhaps, aspects of responsible research and innovation that you brought to bear, but also to talk to the importance of your publications rather than, and the impact, rather than, talking about the journal destination or even the number of citations, in fact. So although citations are still part or accepted, if you like, as part of the DORA review. So DORA is one way, I suppose, that we've tried to we've only really introduced this over the last few years as a funder, but we, try and encourage our reviewers to look at things differently, to look at the broader, as I say, outputs and deliverables, and wider benefits that a researcher brings to the table, as opposed to just focusing in on the publication venue and the metrics associated with that. One of the other things that Janet raised was also of great interest to me, and that was in terms of creating more balance in our portfolio and encouraging more female applicants. So like the ERC, we found through our analysis that females do not apply to the same degree as their male counterpart in science. Even though we know that cohort of researchers exist, there's far fewer applications for early stage research, as in basic research funding, compared with their male counterpart. And furthermore, when we did the analysis, we found that females do not ask for this as much money as men. So we ran a call last year called the Frontiers for the Future program, and that funds basic oriented research to individual researchers. And we specifically reached out to our female applicants by saying, please come and apply to us, and please ask for as much money as the men do. And we did other things, including we made sure the language was gender neutral, just in case there was any language in our call documents that might appeal more to the male scientist compared to the female scientist. And we also introduced a gender measure whereby where applicants had an equal score, that the female would be advanced to be funded where the money was not, where we didn't have sufficient funds, if you like, to fund everyone. So this sort of speaks to that, as the idea is that point that Janet raised, where who the ones at the top are and who the ones at the bottom are, then you have a whole bunch in between that are really very good, and they reach the quality bar, if you like, in terms of deserving of funding. But we don't have the money to fund everyone. So we said up front in the call, where two applicants score the same, we will advance the female over the male where we don't have sufficient funds. So we did bring up the numbers of female grant holders. But I suppose if you want me to talk, I suppose, more broadly about how COVID, I suppose, has... If
we can come back to COVID in a second, if you don't... Sorry,
sure.
Maria, it's just...
That's all right.
That's an excellent point you raised about fairness and diversity and inclusiveness in how you make decisions, because it's very easy for committees composed of rather monochromatic viewpoints or look to look for people in their own image. And it's great you found ways of proactively improving the chance of leveling the playing field on a gender basis. But I just wanted to bring up one other thing that I remember was a great learning experience for me as a young group leader many years ago in Heidelberg, when I worked at EMBL Heidelberg. And it really gave me an opportunity before I worked in Scotland, England, America, but I got exposed to fabulously talented young PhD students, postdocs from Southern European countries or Eastern European countries, who I realized when they came to a laboratory like EMBL and were given the opportunity, weren't just as good, if not better than their peers from the UK or Germany or France. But I realized that their CVs would not automatically have got them through the door in the first place, because it was much harder for them to have 2 papers in Nature from their PhD where they were working. So is there any comparable way, this is a question for you, maybe Jack can comment as well, of not just as important as it is, not just equaling up the gender balance, but also people coming from families where there's, they're not the child of a couple of professors or clinicians, that, from people from poorer families or from other disadvantaged minorities who may not get a fair crack at the whip. Do you think that's a role or important? How do you choose that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a funder, one of my briefs, I guess, is looking after our gender equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. And, our starting point has been to create more balance in the representation of male and female in our portfolio of grants. But as we move into our next strategy period, we'll be broadening that to look at equality, diversity and inclusion. And I mean, this is an area, of course, which is, I think, on the tip of everyone's tongues, and anyone who's a funder is thinking about this because of the importance to have that representation of society in your portfolio of researchers. Because, if your portfolio of researchers are represented, as you've referred to, Angus, by a very elitist group who've had the benefit of education or been in Ivy League colleges or whatever, it is very likely that the outcome of the research will not reflect societal needs. So hence the importance of ensuring that your portfolio of researchers represents the cross-section of society. And that also...
bring in, Janet, because she was putting her hand out and say that this is a subject I resonates with me a lot, because I grew up in a city, in an area of the city where the school I went to, more graduates went to prison than went to university.
That explains it all, Angus.
Yeah.
Just if I could say, in the ERC, we've worked very hard. So I was on the council for about 6 years, and we worked very hard on the gender issue. And that part of that, I think, now looks reasonably okay. But what's also a problem in Europe is funding the EU 13 countries, which don't have established research communities sometimes. And this has proved to be really an intractable problem, because they don't have the benefits, they don't have the track records. But as Angus says, if you have somebody in your lab, you realize how incredibly good some of these people are. And so there is a lot of effort going on at the moment to try to broaden and make sure that the funding from the ERC gets distributed in one way, distributed more evenly between the countries. One way to do that is to ensure that we have people on the panels who are from those countries, just as you want a reasonable gender balance. Yep. You also want a reasonable balance from people from many countries in the ERC, or in an individual country, you would want people from different universities or different institutes to sit on panels. So that's very important. But I think this whole issue of diversity and equality and how to level up is one of the most challenging that we've got to face.
Could I ask you both, and in fact, actually, and this is really a question for the audience. I wonder if perhaps you could put your views in, or maybe we have a vote on it. But I sometimes wondered whether you can get the best outcome for reviewing applications from any subset of people. Usually the way grant committees work is, you formulate a committee, you can make it diverse, you can balance it by ethnicity, by gender, and so forth. But in the end, the reviewing is usually one of the least scientific aspects, because it usually comes down to, a small number of people invited on that committee to make a vote, which is inevitably colored by prejudices, subconscious biases, all these things, even if you don't want to. So my question, Janet, as a world expert in computational biology, would it be better to instead of inviting, someone like Jeff here onto the committee to give his opinion, as valuable as that would be, to say, Jeff, why don't you join in and help build a deep learning algorithm with all these data from past grants to build a more fair, balanced outcome.
So actually,
Just nodding his head. I'm not sure if he's agreeing or volunteering.
But there is a program. There's a program which allows us to choose. We were going to experiment. I'm not there now. I've left, obviously, but to see if we could use it to get at this broad agenda, which is based on AI and past data, to try to improve this balance. So I think this technology on using previous data to improve the way that we review graphs is really quite important going forward.
Okay, do you have any comments specifically, Marianne, about that? I see some interesting comments in the chat as well that I'd like to bring, but anything specific about how you think in Science Foundation Ireland about reinventing the wheel or reevaluating your own criteria for?
Yeah, I there's a group of colleagues in SFI who've been looking at alternative ways to review based on all our previous data. So I can't really comment on it in terms of what the outcome is, but it is something that I guess we were looking at probably pre-COVID because there are significant costs, I suppose, associated with flying reviewers in from all over the world and bringing them all into one spot. But I almost feel that may have gone off the table now. We've moved into the world of virtual review. I think, we all know peer review. However, we try to improve it and to remove all the unconscious biases and how we create level playing fields and parity practice and all that will always be subject to some criticism, I suppose. And we probably end up reinventing the wheel at a certain point. I'm not really sure. But if we have some solution in SFI, I'd be happy to talk about it at some point in the future.
Can I just, in response to a comment actually from Jeff Barton, I'd just like to say that the idea isn't to replace the committee with a machine learning algorithm. The idea is to use the algorithms to try to improve our choices that we make for people who go onto the committee. And ultimately, the committee will decide. So it's a case AI. It's not that it's taking over. It's more that it's helping us to make more informed decisions. I think.
Yeah, I mean, it would sort of be interesting to run it in like shadow mode. So if you tried to set this up and didn't implement the decisions but recorded them separately and said, if they picked a different, how would the sets of grants overlap, and would it be better or worse? Maybe that, I don't know if anyone's ever submitted a grant to say they want to build a better funding system to replace the committee that's going to decide on their grant. That would be like a machine that sort of builds itself. But that maybe you can submit such a. Janet, let's do it.
At the ERC, we were trying to we wanted to have dynamic panels where the panel was formed according to the grant applications that were received. Now, this is very complicated, and so they developed some tools that would allow the automatic identification of panels for past calls, in effect. At the moment, those tools weren't sufficiently rigorous, I don't think, to produce. There are all sorts of problems when you start doing that. But different fields use the same name, like domain. In proteins, a protein domain is one thing.
Sure.
And of course, in electromagnetism, a domain is another thing. So all these sorts of issues arise. But it's quite I do feel that we ought to use our knowledge of how these things work to try and improve the way we do things.
Marion, one of the things that we have also talked about in previous Coffee with EMBLs is to what extent politicians influence funding committee. Ultimately, I guess they have to be answerable to the person in the street, the voter, and in some be able to agree with and account for putting public money into science policy. It's sort of interesting to know in this whole question, how do you explain to them the importance of basic research when you can't make an immediate short-term connection to a new jab? I guess it's easy with the pandemic to say, fund this because they'll make a vaccine and you'll save the world. But what if you'd been talking about COVID-19 virus 2 years before the pandemic broke out? I mean, I actually have a good friend who was at the UK's, still a good friend, one of the UK's lead virologists who studied human coronaviruses. And I would just say that it was not a linear relationship. This might lead to a pandemic. You obviously should, we need people like you. You obviously should be funded. So how do you explain that? In the UK, at least, there are perhaps other people from the UK who know more than we could comment in the chat. As far as I know, very few members of the UK Parliament have PhDs or a background in scientific research.
Sure.
And yet they become the political masters of funding agencies that have to do this. How is the situation in Ireland, Marion?
Yeah.
How do you cope with that?
Well, first of all, I just want to say hi, Ian. I see you there. And Ian will know that for years when I was at the EMBL Council, I used to have to sort of lament our plight in Ireland about trying to convince our government about the importance of investing in basic research, because particularly, I guess, following the economic downturn in 2009, 2010, there was a lot of questions around the level of investment that was being made in basic research when, the politicians couldn't see what the outcome was or what the immediate impact was, and they wanted an outcome now. And we fought very hard to maintain our budget, and we grew our budget, in fact. And I think if I might say, one of the positives of COVID, and I say that in a very guarded way, is that it has brought the importance of basic research, the importance of investing in basic research to the fore. And one of, I think, the fortunate positions that Ireland has been in through COVID is that we have a small but very internationally renowned group of immunologists, and they're highly regarded internationally, and some of them are ERC award recipients, and they've all been funded and are funded by SFI monies, and they're led by Luke O'Neill, who you will have heard of. And Luke has become the spokesperson for COVID on national radio. And national radio is where everyone listens to, and everyone is following a Q&A session with Luke practically on a daily basis, where he answers questions from the public about COVID. And all of his answers are in the context of the basic science, around the science of the vaccines. The average person in the public who's not a scientist is now using words like mRNA and, immunoglobulins and spike proteins. And it's really, really helped, I suppose, as I say, to emphasize the importance of investing in basic research and how this can have an impact in terms of obviously supporting, ultimately, I suppose, the development of diagnostics and treatments and vaccines for the likes of COVID, but also just around, I think, enabling them to understand better around the time frame of how science it's like a cake, it gets put into the oven, it needs to cook, you can't take it out too soon because it could collapse in the middle, so it really has helped, I think, to solidify, or even in some cases embed that the sense of importance of investing in basic research, even for a small country like Ireland. And that in turn, I suppose, has influenced the government more in terms of, growing the investment in science. And that has happened, and it's happening now. We had money last year, or more money, I suppose, to invest in something called a COVID rapid response call, to give researchers money to do basic and applied research. And I love the fact that Janet says they don't distinguish between that, because I think it's just about funding good research, whatever that is, but but research that is able to tell you about its direction of travel. And that, when this research is done, it will feed into the next iteration of research, which may result in some tangible impact, or that this research is about perhaps developing a diagnostic. So I think that's the one positive that has come out of this, is that it has reinforced the value of investing in basic research.
I mean, that's really encouraging to hear. I suffered all my life and career from being an incorrigible optimist, always seeing a potential good outcome and hoping that's going to be realistic. We get there. And when we first discussed this in some of the first coffee with EMBLs, I was really hoping this would be such a great illustration of the importance of a broad base of basic science and broad expertise, because you don't know where the next trouble spot, hotspot area is going to be. We sort of live in a vacuum of knowing what the future is going to be. That it would help encourage more money going to basic science. I'm really pleased to hear you say that, because I've got more worried now that actually the outcome is going to be post-pandemic. There's just not enough money around, and let's shove all the money into vaccines or very narrow areas that have a very short path in public understanding between put money in that, get a cure or a jab in the arm, solve the problem, as opposed to looking a few moves ahead of the chess game of life and thinking, actually, we want to spread the distribution of funding into areas that are not maybe essential today, but in 1 or 2 or 10 years' time might be. So are you restoring my optimism, Marion? Is that
long may it last.
Great.
I mean, not COVID, obviously, but long may any of the positive outcomes last in terms of supporting, the plight, I suppose, of basic research investment, where everyone understands it can't just be a quick fix. It sometimes there needs to be, as I say, the cake needs to be in the oven for a certain period of time before you get the wonderful outcome, unless you're a cook like me, generally destroys cakes. But
well, I think one of the things.
Yeah, sorry, finish. Now, I just have a question for Marion and Janet before we.
Okay, well, in fact, I was just about to introduce you, Isabel, because I felt that in this discussion, the vista, the vision for the future has to be broadening understanding in the population. We started off by discussing how can we achieve that? How can we, and then we've explored topics that how can we improve diversity? How can we make science more broad-based? And one of the ways is to reach out to places where it's harder to do science. And it would be great if you could, you and Mariana could tell us something about the charity you founded with that mission.
Yeah, we'll do that in a minute. I had a question which is touching in the same topic. We were talking about, how difficult it is to achieve a representation of society in positions, minorities, and so on. If you think of where we are with women in science at the moment, and how long we've been in the picture, and how far we are from any equality, if you now translate that to minorities, let's say Black people in science, I was wondering whether funding bodies are thinking that we should be a bit more drastic and really support just minorities in grants, just for minorities, and positions just for minorities. And I'm trying to get that going at my university, and it's really hard because, of course, it's positive discrimination. So where is the money coming from for those positions and those grants? But if we carry on in the same slow pace that we've done for women, then minorities will have to wait another, 50, 100 years to be represented. So, and that kind of comes back to what we do. We do a tiny grain, piece of nothing on a huge mountain. But shouldn't we be a bit more controversial and just create those positions now? And the same for women, really.
So,
yeah, of course, Janet, please.
one example. I'm involved with Health Data Research UK, and they recently started an internship just for Black interns. So it's called the Black Internship Scheme. And it's not for a long time. It's only for sort of over summer or something like that. But at least it opens up the opportunity for people, for Black people, then to have some additional training on top. I think I was quite taken aback when that was first suggested. It's based on, I think for lawyers, there is a similar scheme, or to finance some commercial entities. But I can see for interns that really makes a lot of sense, because it gives them a step in to the world. But at some stage, everybody has to compete on the same level. You can't do it, I don't think. So I've always rather fought against positive discrimination. And I would be horrified if people invited me to do anything just because I was a woman. I just think that's so wrong for science. Science is fundamentally gender neutral. And so I don't want that to happen. I really don't. But I do think there are ways and means of introducing the disadvantaged people into the world. And then, like everybody else, I think there has to be a level of swing yourself, ultimately.
But I guess Isabel's point is, how do we accelerate that, Jack? I mean, it's something I think many of us can struggle with. One thing that definitely was something that made me take notice, which was pointed out to me by when there's now our dean, actually, is that our department has a series of invited guest lectures, prize lectures. And they put the photograph of the person who'd given that prize lecture over the years in one of the corridors. So many people walking through the Institute see it. And I'd see it. And to be honest, I never even noticed this. But someone pointed out to me, from years 1 to 15, every single one of those pictures was a picture of a middle-aged or elderly white man. Registered nothing with me. Particularly as I've now become an elderly white man. I was always a man, but not always elderly. But I guess that did make me stop and think of the importance of actually showing that when you walk past, you don't just see a monochrome set of the usual things. So anyway, it's just a point. Ian, I see you're online. You must have an opinion about this. I thought you've got your hand up.
That's his hand up.
It's something just very simple and related to what Isabel said. The countries that we all hold up as the best examples for gender balance in science and other occupations are the Scandinavian countries. And I just want to remind everybody that they got there by making it illegal not to have a balanced gender in the population of university positions, in business positions, etc. And so I completely buy from the point of view of the individual Janet's argument that people either are good enough for a position or they're not. But at the level of the population, I think I wouldn't dismiss at the level of the population having some kind of enforced positive discrimination for a period. It worked in Scandinavia, and everybody now thinks of Scandinavia as being on top of the world in this area. No, they only got there because they chose bad women. That isn't how people see it.
I'd love to take this forward. Just to make it even more controversial and stir the pot a little bit more, how do we manage to do that without leaving behind other minorities? Today, we talked about gender balancing, critical, obviously important, and then diversity balancing with other disadvantaged backgrounds. It's very easy to identify people with a different skin color as being different. I think there's also a danger that we need to be mindful of, that diversity should include people from socioeconomic backgrounds who might have the same skin color. And here again, I'm reflecting my own background from a particularly poor area of an industrial city, where you end up having a situation that creates secondary complications because you feel everybody cares about this grouping or that grouping and nobody cares about us. And I think that's one of the arguments that can fuel the distasteful side of far-right politics. So very welcome to discuss it. But I would also like Isabel to give you an opportunity and Marianne to tell us about what you've been doing with Cross Africa.
Thank you. Yeah, very briefly. So basically, I give you a little bit of background where the three founders of Cross Africa come from. We're three Spanish women, Marta, Lola, and myself. I think Marta is with us. I'm not sure Lola is. And we, as I said, we are the three of us from Spain. And we experienced a transformation during our lifetime in Spain that was quite traumatic, which was how the introduction of Drosophila as a model system really impacted in the development of cell and developmental biology in Spain, which was basically non-existing. Spain was strong in chemistry, in plants, in microorganism science, but there was nothing in cell and developmental biology. And within 2 or 3 decades, by a bunch of people that brought Drosophila to Spain, there was a huge development in those fields. Creation of labs is very inexpensive, it's relatively easy to learn, and you can do highly impacting science with it. So based on that, and based on serendipity, I was invited to help with a course in Africa. We realized that this model could work in helping Africa science. And of course, when I talk about Africa, this is a huge continent. Only, let's say, Nigeria is already over 200 million people, so it's huge. But we did see that there is a huge amount of scientists, very talented scientists, because intelligence and brains have no borders, obviously, and they have no chance to develop their passion for science. And we thought, let's help them set up labs, let's help them develop impacting projects by teaching them how to work with Drosophila and setting up Drosophila labs. And that's what we basically have been doing. We created a charity. We started with 3 founders, a couple of directors. I think Tim Vale from Cambridge is one of the directors. He was also there in the audience, I think. And now we are a much bigger family, including Mariana as a collaborator. All of us are scientists volunteering. And what we do is basically go to Africa, different institutions or universities that contact us, that we see there is a clear case of wanting to develop Drosophila labs, and the interest is from PhD students to the vice chancellor or to the rector, whoever is the top of the university, that they really want to develop this. And then we just go and teach them. We spend quite a long time helping them. So we get participants from that university, but also from other areas around it. It tends to be the areas of Africa where the country is. So if it's Nigeria, then it tends to be West Africa participants. If it's in Kenya, it's more East African participants and so on. And we do these very intense workshops for a while, help set up 1 lab or 2 in the institution where we are doing it. We then cover topics that the university or the institute may be interested in developing. So use Drosophila for cancer studies or neurodegeneration studies or whatever they're interested in. And with this, we basically wanted to create new generation of scientists using Drosophila in Africa, but also connect them. So a couple of years ago, we created the Drosophila, the first African Drosophila Society. And last year, not the year before, of course, last year nothing happened, we had the first African Fly conference in Nigeria. So it's working really well. Now the projects are going from just having labs to also school outreach. So some of the participants of those workshops don't have an easy chance to develop labs. Infrastructure is just too inexisting, whatever they are. But then they can help us educating children at school with Drosophila again. And that is happening as well. And Mariana can tell us a little bit more about that. So basically, I just want to say there is a lot to do for, of course, helping African researchers. And again, I think helping African researchers helps African society, which helps the world societies, including ours. And I just want to say that it's a project that it will carry on for years and years and years, and it will grow. And you're more than welcome to join us in whatever way you want. Also now with outreach, a lot of the grants are asking for outreach activities. If you don't know what to do, maybe you can contact us and put us in your grant, and we can help you with that. And I think in general, to increase minorities or Black people in the molecular biology field in the world is something that we really need to do. And of course, one problem, as we say, is how are they competitive? And that's what we are trying to help with a little bit. Mariana, you want to talk about your expertise on the outreach work?
Sure. There's an opportunity for EMBL alumni specifically here too. So last year, I had the pleasure to go to Nigeria, invited by Amos Abolachi, who I think it's here too. And we did, besides workshops and training that Isabel described that Drosophila usually does, we visited a school, and actually me and the postdoc from my lab, from the Cork group as well, we developed an initiative called the EMBL Pen Pals. And so there were 60 pupils from a school in Ibadan, Nigeria, that wrote postcards to EMBL scientists, and we have 75 scientists answer that. It was a very good experience that could go forward, and the alumni could also be involved. I'll put in the link, the archive to the report of the activity, which is in the EMBL archive. And a lot in the chat, I saw a lot of people talking about how we need more people like Luke O'Neill, like Marion described in the radio, talking about, and how sometimes how people can get to a competitive field is that you need to start early, and really wealthy institutes like EMBL and other institutes that everyone is working around the world could really play a part in making outreach reach everyone. And like Angus said, it's not just skin color or nationality; it's also social, economical status. There's also neurodiversity. There's age. But I think it starts by looking at ourselves and question. All of us here in the panel have roughly the same skin color, I would say, and come from Europe, for example. And Marion referenced reinventing the wheel. I really think we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The same way that we have DORA assessment for stopping to look at, nature or impact factor or these things, we could really try to find other metrics in recruitment to have everyone in the same place. Yes, and reach out to Drosophila to know, how you could help. You could help by doing new collaborations. If you're thinking about a certain collaboration, are you looking for scientists in the Global South to be your collaborators? Are you inviting scientists from the Global South to your conferences or your trainings, and the outreach, of course?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, we've been talking a lot within this community about things we can do in future to help disseminate better understanding of science. You're providing, I think, an inspirational example. It would be great if we could follow up with you to learn more about it and to help you publicize it, and also to learn from that. So a lot of things to talk about here. I'm conscious a number of people put their hand up. I'd like to just invite them to participate in the order I saw them putting their hand up. So Hridesh, I'm not sure, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, but can I ask you first?
So now, actually, welcome everybody. So I consider Germany as my second home because I spent 10 years in Germany in Max Planck, EMBL, DKFZ in Heidelberg. Now, the question which I have, which is for the Janet and Marion, since I have a couple of 3 or 4 collaborative group in Germany, and we want to continue our mutually interesting area of translational immunology. So, I know that we being in India, being in Asia, we have a limited funding scope, and in Europe, we have a more scope for the funding, like ERC, HF, Human Frontiers, and many other like DFG. So what I want to, emphasize here that, if ERC can be modified or can be customized in such a way that, a third partner can also become a partner of, can also become a co-PI or co-investigator, and that will be fantastic, because then, we can have opportunity and avenue to work together much more closely and can facilitate more collaboration.
Okay, Janet, can you answer?
Yes. For ERC, the synergy routes allow there to be external PIs in another country that will be funded through the ERC grant. So if you applied for a synergy grant, then at least one of the group, which is usually 3 or 4 people, can be from outside of Europe. So that would be available to.
And does that affect how you evaluate the grants? Following on from Isabel's client, does that, or could it feed into a way of leveling up the playing field?
Well, that would be the hope. It wasn't done for that reason.
Okay.
It's done to make the science better, because you want to include the right people on such a proposal. But of course, it can also, that they aren't supposed to, that everybody involved in those grants needs to be a sort of highest quality. But
my second question to Janet is that, some point of time somebody has discussed the impact or influence on the politician in decision-making process and the funding application. So, how ERC handle the conflict of interest in the proposal. For example, if you as a reviewer reviewing my proposal on a similar aspect, so whether the conflict of interest is maintained or it is basically disregarded or regarded very high. So what are how do you handle this?
So conflicts of interest are treated very rigorously in the ERC. If you are on a panel and you have a conflict with somebody, then you need to at least step out of the room. And they always, very often, if people perceive a conflict in a review, that review is discarded. So there is, as far as possible, I mean, it's not always possible, and we all need to some extent to trust the reviewers that they do their best without being conflicted. But if there is a known conflict, then that review would be discarded.
Fatima was the next person. Thank you very much for this. Fatima was the next person I saw put the hand up. Can I answer?
Angus, sorry to interrupt you. You can call me HP. I was known as the HP in the whole.
Okay, I'll remember that for future.
Okay, thank you, Angus. I would just like first to congratulate Isabel and Mariana for this initiative that they had. And I just was curious on how the pandemics had affected actually the functioning of and all the projects within the charity, because I imagine you could not travel last year, and who knows when you will be able to travel again. Has there been any flexibility on the type of projects you can do?
Yeah, no, it's been basically, I would say, we've stopped post, except for one project that I can tell you in a second. It's not only the fact that we cannot travel, is the fact that people are completely overwhelmed. We are all scientists with families, kids at home, just surviving, really, teaching online as a new way of teaching. And I think we've just slowed down a lot of the activities. What we've been doing has been especially one virtual conference that was extremely successful. And I think we should organize another one in the light of that this is going to carry on for a while. And it's really easy. I mean, you get top scientists agreeing to give seminars and then open it to absolutely all universities in Africa. there were hundreds of students, and then we did a lot of, Slack chats, and it was incredible. So that's what we are doing at the moment. Also, we are kind of reorganizing North Africa a little bit because we've grown quite a bit. So we're organizing subgroups for effort, a little bit of house cleaning and online work, and carry on talking to our collaborators. For example, Nature Review just asked me, because we wrote a little thing on North Africa, if I could suggest someone maybe in Africa to write a little thing. And so just trying to carry on connecting people this way. But it's been hard. Also, things are hard in Africa too. People don't go to work and so on. So yeah, it's been extremely difficult, not only because of not being able to travel, but because we basically now we are at the point that we need a couple of people dedicated to North Africa work instead of us being scientists with full lives trying to do it. And I think that is the time now.
Okay, thank you.
Ian, you also have your hand up. Did you put it up again, or that was from, no, you...
No, sorry, I didn't take it, Doug.
Okay, that's fine. So again, I would like to add my congratulations, Isabel, to what you and everyone involved in the project has achieved already. I think it is inspirational. I think I wonder how you find the money and the time. Obviously, these are big challenges to do that, and it does raise another question, which I think is relevant to raise with this audience, is whose job is it? Arguably, it's all of our jobs. I mean, I think it's wonderful you've been so proactive in taking on the responsibility, but is it Science Foundation Ireland's job to do this? Is it the ERC's job? Is it the EMBL's job, or just us as individuals? It's always easy to say someone ought to do it rather than we should do it. And I think it would be great if we proactively considered how we perhaps channeled and catalyzed by things the Alumni Association could help with, come up with some additional steps in this direction. But again, I'm very interested to hear people's views on whose responsibility is it to make sure that we train the next generations, we inspire the next generations, and enable people who are currently disadvantaged across any bias of gender, ethnicity, social, economic background to come into the community. What's your thought, Isabel?
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's I think it should be at all levels. There is so much to do. And I think maybe one thing that I found easier than I thought it was going to be is basically how easy it is to convince people to help you. So basically, if you have an idea that can help and you think, oh, it's just me, how am I going to do this? Just write to people, talk to people, and you will find a community ready to help so fast and so easily. It has been my experience. And then see whether it grows. So yeah, go ahead. Don't feel that you cannot do much as one person. And it still feels like it's very little, but it's extremely rewarding as well. So go ahead, even as one person. And of course, if you are part of a bigger community like Marion and Janet are, then as well think if you could influence that community in these issues. I think it needs to go at all levels. And of course, politicians, governments, and so on. But yeah.
I think it would be great if we can also learn for anyone like yourself who's been involved, what worked, what didn't work, what can you teach the rest of us to give, examples so that we don't repeat mistakes or do it more efficiently. So, Nush, can we follow up with that? That would be great. It would be great if we could have Isabel and Mariana and their colleagues, if you're willing to do even more work, prepare something, maybe a little video section or something for one of our future events.
Yeah, that no problem. Or have chats or create any talks with people. And another thing that also, I don't know how many in the talks in here today are from, again, developing countries or countries that you think need help at the research level. Write to us, write to the alumni, and try to get together, organizing conferences as well. I'm interested in organizing UK, Africa conferences, and others may be interested in organizing others. But yeah, we're more than happy to to create something or organize something.
Okay, sign them up. Make sure that that's recorded and will be put on the internet. So we'll hold you to that. Let's all assume that funding won't be the ultimate limiting problem here. And it, once again, encourage everybody who's listening, who's willing to participate, to just let us know and volunteer. I will try to come up with a constructive way to build on this. So once again, the time has flown past. I really am very grateful to everyone who's participated. We've had a very thought-provoking discussion. I'd again like to congratulate Isabel and Mariana for their inspiring contribution, for certainly inspiring me, and I think given us a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much indeed. I'm very grateful to Janet and Marion as well for being guests and for sharing their experiences in science funding, many other aspects of science policy. Again, for those of you who've had a vaccine already, congratulations, and I hope it's successful for everyone else, including yourself. I hope one of these days we get a vaccine and we can return to a life more normal in future. But in the meantime, stay safe, and thank you again for your participation, and we'll see you all again next month.